My cousin harassed me and demands I change my baby's name. My cousin Rachel called me the day after I announced my daughter's name to the family. We'd named her Lily after my grandmother who raised me when my parents died. Rachel was screaming that I'd stolen her baby name and I needed to change the birth certificate immediately. She said she'd been planning to name her future daughter Lily since she was 12 and everyone knew it. The problem was Rachel wasn't pregnant, wasn't married, and wasn't even dating anyone. She was 34 and had been saying she'd have kids someday for the past decade. I told her she couldn't reserve a name for a hypothetical baby, and she lost it. She said I knew how much that name meant to her, and I'd deliberately stolen it to hurt her. She actually accused me of getting pregnant first just to use the name before her. She said I'd ruined her entire future because now she could never have her perfect daughter named Lily. I reminded her that millions of people were named Lily, and she could still use it. She said it wouldn't be special anymore if my daughter had it first, and everyone would think she copied me. She wanted the glory of bringing back grandmother's name into the family, and I'd robbed her of that moment. For the next 3 months, Rachel made my life hell. She refused to acknowledge my daughter existed. At family gatherings, she'd refer to her as the baby or your child, never Lily. She'd tell relatives I'd betrayed her and stolen her dream. She actually made a PowerPoint presentation for Thanksgiving, showing all the times she'd mentioned wanting to name her daughter Lily, including diary entries from middle school and text messages to friends. She presented this to the entire family while my 3-month-old slept in my arms. She demanded a family vote on whether I should change my daughter's name. My aunt shut that down immediately, but Rachel kept pushing. She started buying baby items with the name Lily monogrammed on them and displaying them at family events. She'd hold up a blanket saying this was for her future real Lily, the one who deserved the name. She'd post old photos of our grandmother with captions about how grandmother would be devastated that the wrong granddaughter got to honor her. She actually called my daughter's daycare and tried to get them to call her by her middle name instead, saying there was a family dispute about the first name. The daycare had to ban her from the property. Rachel then started telling everyone she was trying to get pregnant through IVF, so she could have her Lily. She wasn't doing IVF, she just wanted sympathy, and to make me look like I'd forced her into desperate measures. She created a fake fundraising page for her fertility journey that she shared everywhere talking about how she needed to have her Lily to heal from family betrayal. She raised $2,000 from distant relatives and friends before anyone realized she wasn't even seeing a fertility doctor. The money went to buying more monogrammed Lily items that she'd photograph and post online. Here's where it gets interesting. Rachel's ex-boyfriend from college reached out to me after seeing her posts about the name drama. He told me Rachel had pulled this exact same thing with his sister 8 years ago. His sister named her son Oliver, and Rachel had a meltdown claiming she'd always planned to use that name. She'd harassed the sister for months until they had to threaten a restraining order. He had emails and texts from that incident that were word for word identical to what she was sending me. Turns out Rachel had a pattern of claiming ownership over names whenever anyone in her orbit had a baby. I invited Rachel over to discuss the situation calmly. She arrived with a list of demands, including that I legally change Lily's name, pay her back for the emotional distress, and sign a document saying I'd never speak about this to future family members. I told her I had a compromise. I'd found a lawyer who specialized in unusual cases, and we could establish legal name rights for the family. She could officially register her claim to specific names for future children, and no one could use them. Rachel was thrilled and immediately started listing not just Lily, but 12 other names she wanted to reserve. I gave her the lawyer's contact information and said he was expecting her call. The lawyer was actually my friend's husband who agreed to play along. He met with Rachel and had her sign multiple documents claiming exclusive rights to various names. He told her the filing fee would be $8,000 to make it legally binding across all states. Rachel paid it immediately using the rest of her fake fundraising money plus her savings. She posted everywhere that she'd legally secured her baby names, and no one could steal from her again. Of course, there's no such thing as legal name rights. The money was gone, and Rachel thought she'd won something real. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning with my laptop open and Lily sleeping in her bassinet next to me. Evan had sent me everything in 3 separate emails, each one packed with screenshots and forwarded messages from 8 years ago. I opened the first email and started reading through what Rachel had sent to his sister back then. The words made my stomach drop. She'd used almost the exact same phrases about stolen dreams and family betrayal. She'd accused Virginia of deliberately getting pregnant to use the name Oliver first. She'd demanded apologies and name changes and written long paragraphs about how the name was spiritually hers. I pulled up the messages Rachel had been sending me over the past few months and put them side by side on my screen. The patterns were so similar it felt like she'd copied and pasted from some template she kept. Same structure, same escalation, same threats about legal action. Even the way she signed off her messages was identical. I spent 2 full days going through everything Evan had sent. There were emails where Rachel had created elaborate backstories about why Oliver was her destined baby name. There were text messages where she'd told mutual friends that Virginia was a thief who'd ruined her future. There were screenshots of social media posts where she'd painted herself as the victim of a cruel relative who didn't understand family legacy. Every single thing she'd done to me, she'd done to Virginia first. I found Evan's phone number in one of his emails and called him. He answered on the second ring, and I asked if his sister would be willing to talk to me directly. He said Virginia had been following my situation online after he told her about it, and she'd been hoping I'd reach out. He gave me her contact information and told me to mention his name, so she'd know it was safe to talk. I sent Virginia a message that same afternoon explaining who I was and what Rachel had been doing. She responded within an hour saying she'd been waiting for someone else to experience what she'd gone through, because she knew Rachel would do it again. We set up a video call for that evening after Lily went to bed. Virginia looked tired even through the screen. She told me she'd spent 6 months dealing with Rachel's harassment after her son was born. Rachel had shown up at her house unannounced multiple times. She'd called Virginia's workplace claiming there was a family emergency just to get her on the phone. She'd sent gifts for the baby with notes about how the wrong child was using a sacred family name. Virginia said the worst part was how Rachel made everything sound reasonable when she explained it to other people. She'd frame it as a simple misunderstanding about family traditions, not the obsessive harassment it actually was. Virginia and her husband had finally threatened to file a restraining order, and suddenly Rachel backed off completely. She'd never apologized or acknowledged that her behavior was wrong. She'd just moved on like nothing had happened and started focusing on something else. Virginia warned me that Rachel had a pattern of fixating on things until she either got what she wanted or faced serious legal consequences. She said family intervention wouldn't work because Rachel was too good at playing the victim. The next day, Virginia sent me copies of every message Rachel had sent her. I downloaded them all and created a document comparing Rachel's messages to Virginia with the messages she'd been sending me. I organized them by theme so the similarities were impossible to miss. Accusations of theft, demands for apologies, threats about legal action, claims about spiritual connections to names. The wording was sometimes identical down to specific phrases. I showed everything to my husband that night after dinner. We sat on the couch with my laptop between us, and I walked him through the whole timeline. He'd known Rachel was being difficult, but he hadn't realized how calculated and repetitive her behavior was. He looked at the side-by-side comparisons and asked if I thought Rachel had some kind of mental health issue that made her do this. I said I didn't know, but that it didn't change the fact that she was harassing us and had harassed other people the same way. We talked for over an hour about what to do next. He wanted to pursue a restraining order immediately. I was worried that would just give Rachel more ammunition to claim she was persecuted. He pointed out that my stress levels were affecting how I was bonding with Lily, and that I'd barely slept in weeks. He said we needed to protect our family first, and worry about Rachel's narrative second. My phone rang 2 days later while I was feeding Lily. It was my Aunt Madeline calling to check on me. She said she'd heard about the incident at the daycare where Rachel had been banned from the property. She asked if I was okay, and if there was anything she could do to help. I put her on speaker and told her everything while I burped Lily. I explained about Evan and Virginia and the 8-year pattern. I told her about the identical messages and the repeated behavior. Madeline was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said something that surprised me. She told me the family had been enabling Rachel's behavior for years by treating it as harmless weirdness. She said Rachel had always been intense about things, but that intensity had gotten worse as she'd gotten older, and everyone had just learned to work around it instead of addressing it. Madeline admitted she was genuinely worried about Rachel's mental state now. She said this situation with the baby name had pushed Rachel further than she'd ever gone before, and that the family needed to stop pretending it was just Rachel being Rachel. I asked Madeline if she knew about any other times Rachel had done something similar. She hesitated and then told me about an incident 5 years ago. A family friend had named her son after Rachel's grandfather, and Rachel had completely lost it. She'd made similar accusations about theft and betrayal. She'd demanded the friend change the baby's name, and had caused problems at family gatherings for months. The situation had only died down because the friend lived in another state, and eventually just stopped coming to family events. Madeline said the family had basically waited for Rachel to move on to something else, and she eventually had. Nobody had ever confronted her about the pattern or tried to get her help. They'd just avoided the topic and hoped each incident would be the last one. I realized something after talking to Madeline. If I confronted Rachel directly or got a restraining order, I'd just become another villain in her story. She'd find new ways to insert herself into the narrative as the victim. She'd tell everyone I'd persecuted her for having feelings about a family name. She'd make herself the center of attention by being the wronged party instead of the person causing harm. I needed a different approach that would expose her pattern without making me look cruel or vindictive. I started documenting everything the next day. I took screenshots of every social media post Rachel had made about the name situation. I saved copies of her fake fundraising campaign with all the false claims about IVF treatments. I wrote down witness statements from family members who'd seen her behavior at gatherings. I got a copy of the ban notice from the daycare with their documentation of her phone call. I created a file folder on my computer with everything organized by date and category. I was building a clear record of harassment that showed an undeniable pattern. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion that Rachel had been systematically trying to control and manipulate me through intimidation and public pressure. Rachel posted a new update on social media 3 days later. She'd written a long post about her upcoming IVF consultation and how excited she was to finally start her journey to motherhood. She'd included photos of what she claimed was the fertility clinic she'd visited for her initial appointment. The photos showed a modern medical office with plants in the waiting room and educational posters on the walls. She'd written detailed captions about her consultation and how supportive the staff had been. I looked at the photos and something felt wrong about them. They looked too generic, too perfect. I saved the images to my computer and ran them through a reverse image search. The results came back immediately. The photos were stock images from a medical supply website. Rachel hadn't visited any clinic. She'd downloaded generic photos of medical offices and posted them as if they were real. She was still lying about the IVF treatments, and now she was creating fake evidence to support her lies. I took screenshots of the reverse image search results showing where the photos actually came from. I saved everything to my evidence folder. I sat with that information for a full day trying to decide what to do with it. Then I started sending private messages to certain family members. I didn't make a big announcement or try to publicly shame Rachel. I just quietly shared the evidence of the fake clinic photos with people I knew would take it seriously. I sent it to Madeline first with a message saying I wasn't trying to start drama, but that I thought she should know Rachel was fabricating evidence about her fertility journey. I sent it to two of my uncles who'd been sympathetic to Rachel's story. I sent it to my cousin who'd donated money to Rachel's fake fundraising campaign. I included the original photos from Rachel's post and the reverse image search results showing they were stock images. I didn't editorialize or add commentary, I just presented the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. Within 2 days, people started questioning other parts of Rachel's story in the family group chat. Someone asked which clinic she was using. Someone else asked about her doctor's name. Rachel gave vague answers that didn't really answer the questions. More people started asking for specific details. Rachel's responses got defensive and angry. She accused people of not supporting her during a difficult time. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and people were starting to see the cracks in her narrative. I spent the next few days watching Rachel's credibility crumble in the family group chat. More people asked questions about her fertility treatments. She gave answers that didn't match up with how IVF actually worked. Someone asked about her medication schedule, and she said something about daily injections that made no sense medically. Another cousin who'd actually done IVF pointed out that Rachel's timeline was completely wrong. The consultations didn't work that way. The procedures took months of preparation. Rachel got defensive and said every clinic was different. She accused people of not supporting her during a hard time. But the damage was done. People stopped commenting on her posts with hearts and encouragement. The silence was louder than any accusation. I was having coffee with Juliet when the idea first came up. We'd been friends since college, and she knew everything about the Rachel situation. She was venting about her husband Tyler having to deal with a difficult client who kept making unreasonable demands about a real estate contract. I made some joke about how Tyler should pretend to be a name rights lawyer and send Rachel a cease and desist letter. We both laughed. But after Juliet left, the joke stuck in my mind. I couldn't shake it. What if there was actually a way to use Rachel's obsession with legal ownership against her? What if I could create a scenario where she thought she was getting exactly what she wanted? I started researching that same night after Lily went to sleep. I looked up trademark law and intellectual property rights. I read about how names couldn't be owned in the traditional sense, but how there were legal protections for business names and brand identities. I found cases where people tried to trademark common names and failed. I learned about the difference between state and federal registration systems. I spent hours going down rabbit holes about naming rights and legal precedents. I needed to understand enough to make something fake sound real. The framework had to be believable enough that Rachel wouldn't question it. She wanted official documents and legal authority. I could give her that. By the end of the week, I had pages of notes. I understood how registration systems worked for businesses. I knew the language lawyers used when filing paperwork. I had examples of official forms and fee structures. I felt ready to approach Juliet with the actual plan instead of just a joke. I asked Juliet to meet me for lunch at a quiet restaurant where we could talk privately. She showed up thinking we were just catching up. I waited until after we ordered to bring up Tyler. I told her I had a serious question about whether he'd be willing to help me with something unusual. She looked confused. I explained the whole plan. A fake legal consultation where Tyler would pretend to be a lawyer who specialized in family name rights. He'd create official-looking documents. He'd make Rachel believe she could legally register names for future children. Juliet put down her fork and stared at me. She asked if I was serious. I showed her all the evidence I'd collected. The emails from Evan about Rachel's previous incident with his sister. The pattern of behavior spanning 8 years. The fake fundraising campaign. The harassment at the daycare. I explained that Rachel would never stop unless she thought she'd won. Juliet was quiet for a long time. She said she needed to talk to Tyler first. She wasn't sure he'd agree to something like this. I told her I understood, but that I was running out of options to protect my family. 3 days later, Juliet called me. Tyler had agreed to meet with me to discuss the plan. He wanted to understand exactly what I was proposing before making any decisions. We met at a coffee shop near his office. Tyler was a real estate attorney who looked the part with his suit and briefcase. He listened while I explained everything again. When I finished, he asked a lot of questions. What exactly would he be telling Rachel? What documents would be involved? Would there be any exchange of money? I told him Rachel would probably offer to pay filing fees because that's how she thought legal systems worked. Tyler stopped me there. He said he couldn't take money for fake legal services. That would be fraud. But if Rachel assumed there were fees and chose to pay them based on her own conclusions, that was different. He wanted clear boundaries. He'd play along with the consultation. He'd create the fake documents. But he wouldn't explicitly ask for money or claim to be providing real legal services. If Rachel drew her own conclusions, that was on her. We spent the next 2 weeks creating the Interstate Family Name Registration System. Tyler had access to legal document templates through his work. We modified them to look official, but changed enough details that they were clearly fake to anyone who knew what to look for. We created a multi-page application form asking for proof of emotional connection to each name. We designed certificates that looked like they came from a government office. We wrote up an explanation about protecting family naming traditions across state lines. The whole thing sounded ridiculous when you said it out loud, but on paper, with the right legal language and official formatting, it looked almost believable. Tyler said the key was making it complicated enough that Rachel would think it was real, but obvious enough that she should question it. If she didn't question it, that proved she wasn't thinking rationally. I practiced the conversation I'd have with Rachel dozens of times. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and rehearsed different ways to bring up the lawyer solution. I needed her to think it was her idea. I couldn't push too hard or she'd get suspicious. I had to let her come to the conclusion that legal registration was the answer to all her problems. I anticipated every demand she might make. Name change, public apology, financial compensation, signed agreements. I prepared responses that would redirect her toward the lawyer option without making it obvious. Rachel posted another IVF update a few days later. This time she'd included photos of medication boxes that she claimed were her fertility drugs. I ran the images through a reverse search and found them on a medical supply website. She was still using stock photos. Several family members commented asking specific questions about her doctor and clinic. Rachel's answers got vaguer. She said she wanted privacy about her medical details. Someone pointed out that she'd been sharing details constantly for weeks. Why the sudden need for privacy? Rachel doubled down. She posted a long rant about people not supporting her journey. She said the negativity was affecting her treatment success. She needed positive energy from the family. The comments section filled up with awkward silence. I called Rachel that afternoon. I told her I wanted to talk about finding a peaceful way forward. She answered on the first ring. She launched immediately into her demands. She wanted me to legally change Lily's name. She wanted a public apology posted on social media. She wanted me to pay her $3,000 for emotional distress. She wanted a signed document saying I'd never discuss this situation with future family members. She went on for 10 minutes without letting me speak. I let her talk herself out. When she finally paused, I told her I'd been thinking about her concerns. I said I understood she felt her rights had been violated. She jumped on that word. Rights. She said exactly. She had rights to that name. I agreed that she felt strongly about protecting names. Then I mentioned I'd been talking to a lawyer friend who'd told me something interesting about family name registration systems. Rachel's tone changed immediately. She asked what I meant by registration systems. I explained slowly that there were legal frameworks for protecting naming rights within families. People could officially register their claim to specific names for future children. It created a legal record that prevented other family members from using those names. Rachel asked if this was real. I told her my lawyer friend had mentioned it. I wasn't sure about all the details. Rachel demanded to know more. She asked how it worked, what it cost, how long it took, whether it was binding in all states. I had answers ready for every question. I'd researched enough to make it sound completely legitimate. The registration required documentation of emotional connection to each name. There were filing fees for each state. The process took a few weeks. Once registered, the names were legally protected within the family structure. Rachel asked the same questions 3 different ways. I gave consistent answers each time. By the end of the call, she was asking when she could meet with this lawyer. I told Rachel I needed to check with him first since he specialized in unusual cases and wasn't always taking new clients. She asked why that mattered if he was a real lawyer. I explained that family name registration was such a specific area of law that only a few attorneys handled it, which made their services expensive and selective. Rachel's tone changed from demanding to almost pleading. She said she needed this, that it was the only way to protect what was rightfully hers. I promised to reach out to him and see what I could arrange. She made me swear I'd call him that same day. I agreed just to get her off the phone. I waited 3 full days before texting Rachel the contact information. Every single day she called me twice asking if I'd heard back from the lawyer yet. The first call would come around 10 in the morning, the second around 8 at night. I let most of them go to voicemail. When I did answer, I told her I was still waiting to hear back, that he was reviewing potential clients, that this kind of specialized legal work required careful consideration. Rachel got more frantic with each call. She said time was important because other family members might try to register names first. I asked her what other family members she was worried about. She listed 3 cousins who were pregnant or trying to get pregnant. She wanted to beat them to the registration office. On the 3rd day, I sent her Tyler's number with a message saying he'd agreed to meet with her. Rachel responded within 30 seconds thanking me and saying she was calling him right away. Tyler had set up everything perfectly. He rented a small office space in a real law building downtown, where one of his colleagues worked. He had business cards printed that said Tyler Gray, family rights attorney. He even had a secretary answer the phone when Rachel called. The secretary was actually Tyler's sister who worked from home and agreed to help for one afternoon. She took Rachel's information and scheduled her for a consultation 2 days later. Rachel texted me that night saying the lawyer's office seemed very professional and she had a good feeling about this. She asked if I knew how much it would cost. I told her I wasn't sure, but that specialized legal services were never cheap. She said she didn't care about the cost, that this was worth any amount of money. I screenshot that message and sent it to Tyler. He needed to see how committed she was to this. Tyler called me the morning of Rachel's appointment. He was nervous about pulling this off, but also kind of excited. He'd spent the previous evening researching actual trademark law and intellectual property rights, so he could sound believable. He practiced legal jargon in front of his wife Juliet. She told me later that watching him prepare was both hilarious and impressive. He took the role seriously even though the whole thing was fake. Rachel arrived at Tyler's office 15 minutes early. His sister texted him that she was in the waiting room filling out intake forms. Tyler had created an entire packet of paperwork asking about Rachel's family history, her emotional connections to various names, and her future family planning goals. Rachel filled out every single page in detail. When Tyler finally called her back to his office, she had a folder with her containing additional documentation. She'd brought copies of old diary entries, text messages, social media posts, and family photos. She had evidence prepared for every name she wanted to claim. Tyler told me later that Rachel spent the first 20 minutes of their meeting explaining her vision for protecting family legacy through name registration. She talked about how important it was to preserve grandmother's memory, to honor deceased relatives, to maintain family traditions. Then she pulled out her list. She didn't just want to register Lily. She had 12 names total, including our grandmother's name, our grandfather's name, 2 great-grandparents' names, and several names she claimed had special meaning to her from childhood. Tyler asked her to explain her connection to each name. Rachel had stories ready for all of them. Some of the stories were obviously made up on the spot, but she told them with such conviction that Tyler almost believed her. Tyler explained the registration system using enough legal terminology to sound credible. He talked about interstate family name protection frameworks, emotional trademark considerations, and legacy preservation statutes. None of it was real, but it sounded official enough. He told Rachel she could register up to 15 names under the Comprehensive Family Protection Package. She immediately asked if she could add 3 more names to her list. Tyler said that would be fine as long as she could document her emotional connection to them. Rachel started listing reasons right there in his office. Then Tyler got to the cost breakdown. He explained that each name required documentation filing, state-by-state registration in all 50 states, and a master federal registration to make it legally binding everywhere. The documentation fees alone were substantial. The state registrations added up quickly. The federal filing was the most expensive part. Tyler watched Rachel's face as he calculated the total. $8,000. She didn't even blink. She asked if she could pay half up front and half when the paperwork was officially filed. Tyler agreed to that payment structure because refusing would have seemed suspicious. Rachel pulled out her checkbook immediately and wrote a check for $4,000. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel while I was making dinner that night. She said she'd met with the lawyer and everything was being taken care of. She used 3 exclamation points. She said Tyler was professional and knowledgeable, and she felt confident her names would be protected. She thanked me for connecting her with him. She said this was exactly what she needed to finally have peace about the whole situation. I stared at that message for a long time before responding. I told her I was glad she felt good about it. 2 days later, Rachel sent Tyler a photo of her completed paperwork. The forms he'd given her were intentionally ridiculous. They asked questions about her spiritual connection to each name, her dreams involving the names, her future children's projected personalities based on the names she'd chosen. Rachel answered every question seriously. She wrote paragraphs about how she felt grandmother's spirit guiding her toward the name Lily. She described detailed visions of her future daughter's life. She rated her emotional attachment to each name on a scale of 1 to 10. Every single name got a 10. Tyler forwarded me screenshots of the most absurd answers. We both felt guilty laughing at them but couldn't help ourselves. Tyler called me the next day while I was feeding Lily her bottle. He told me Rachel had spent almost 2 hours in his office that morning, filling out every single form with intense focus. She wrote detailed paragraphs explaining her connection to each name on her list. Some of the names she'd never mentioned to anyone before, but she had complete backstories ready. She claimed the name Sophia was meaningful because she'd once had a dream about a daughter with that name when she was 16. She said the name Rachel connected to a childhood friend who'd moved away, and she wanted to honor that friendship. Tyler said she got emotional talking about some of them, like she'd genuinely convinced herself these stories were real and significant. She asked him multiple times if the registration would hold up in court if someone challenged her rights. Tyler assured her the documentation was thorough and legally binding in all 50 states. Rachel left his office looking relieved and triumphant, clutching her copies of the paperwork like they were precious documents. 3 days later, Rachel posted on Facebook about taking important legal steps to protect her family legacy. She didn't give specifics, but the tone was clear. She positioned herself as someone fighting for what was rightfully hers, someone who'd been wronged but was now taking proper action through official channels. She used phrases like standing up for family values and preserving what matters most. Several cousins commented asking what she meant. Rachel responded vaguely, saying some family members would understand and others would learn in time. My Aunt Madeline commented asking if everything was okay. Rachel replied that she was finally getting the respect and protection she deserved. I read through the comments feeling a weird mix of satisfaction and unease. The plan was working exactly as intended, but seeing her public declarations made it feel more real and more wrong at the same time. 2 weeks passed before Rachel scheduled her final appointment with Tyler. She'd saved up the remaining $4,000 by selling some jewelry and taking money from her savings account. Tyler met with her again and presented official-looking certificates for each of her registered names. He'd printed them on heavy cardstock with fake seals and signatures that looked completely legitimate. Each certificate listed the name, Rachel's information, and a registration number that appeared official. Rachel held each one carefully, reading through the text multiple times. She asked Tyler how long the registration would last, and he told her it was permanent unless she chose to transfer or cancel it. She thanked him repeatedly, saying he'd given her peace of mind she hadn't felt in months. Tyler felt guilty watching her pay the final amount, but he kept his professional demeanor throughout the meeting. After she left, he texted me saying he hoped we knew what we were doing. Rachel posted photos of her framed certificates the same evening. She'd put them in matching black frames and hung them in her apartment. The photos showed all 12 certificates displayed on her wall like diplomas or awards. Her caption talked about officially securing her future children's names and how good it felt to have legal protection for something so important to her family. She tagged me in the post with a comment about how some people understand the importance of respecting legal boundaries and proper procedures. Dozens of family members and friends commented congratulations and positive messages. People said they were proud of her for taking action and standing up for herself. A few people asked questions about the registration process, and Rachel responded with vague explanations about specialized family law attorneys and interstate name protection systems. She sounded confident and knowledgeable, like she actually understood what she was talking about. I scrolled through the comments on my phone while Lily napped in her crib. Every congratulatory message felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. These people had no idea Rachel had just paid $8,000 for worthless paper. They thought she'd done something smart and protective. Part of me wanted to comment and tell them the truth right then, but I knew that would make me look vindictive and cruel. Another part of me felt genuine guilt about deceiving her this completely, but mostly I felt relieved. The harassment had stopped. Rachel wasn't calling me anymore or showing up at family events with her monogrammed items. She wasn't posting manipulative things about grandmother or trying to turn people against me. The constant stress that had been affecting my ability to enjoy time with my daughter was finally gone. I told myself the ends justified the means, even though I wasn't entirely convinced. Rachel's entire attitude toward me and Lily shifted within days. At a family barbecue that weekend, she actually acknowledged Lily by name for the first time since I'd announced it. She walked up to me while I was changing Lily's diaper and said she was a beautiful baby. She asked how old Lily was now and made normal small talk about baby milestones. She even brought a small gift, a stuffed bunny that she handed to me without any pointed comments or dramatic gestures. She was pleasant and civil throughout the afternoon, talking to me like we hadn't spent months in an intense conflict. Other family members noticed the change and seemed relieved. My uncle made a joke about everyone finally getting along again. Rachel smiled and said something about how legal clarity helps everyone move forward. I played along, acting like we'd reached some kind of mutual understanding. It felt surreal pretending everything was fine when I knew the foundation of her peace was a complete lie. The next 3 weeks were the most normal family interactions I'd experienced since before Lily was born. Rachel attended every gathering and treated me like a regular cousin instead of an enemy. She talked constantly about her future children and the names she'd protected. She'd tell people about each name's significance and why she'd chosen to register them. She showed photos of her certificates to anyone who seemed interested. Most family members just nodded along politely, not really understanding what she was talking about, but happy she seemed content. My mom asked me privately if I knew what Rachel's legal name thing was about. I told her Rachel had found some way to feel secure about her future family plans, and it seemed to be helping her. Mom said she was just glad the drama was over and everyone could relax again. I agreed, even though I knew the drama was far from over. It was just paused. At a family dinner 3 weeks after Rachel got her certificates, my Aunt Madeline pulled me aside in the kitchen. She asked directly if I knew anything about Rachel's legal name registration. Her tone wasn't accusatory, but it was serious and concerned. She said she'd been curious about the whole thing and had done some research online. She'd searched for interstate family name registration systems and found nothing. She'd contacted 2 family law attorneys asking about name protection procedures, and both had told her no such thing existed. She'd even called the State Bar Association trying to verify Tyler's credentials in family name law and couldn't find any record of that specialty. Madeline looked at me carefully and asked if I had any idea what Rachel had actually paid for. Her eyes were sharp and knowing, like she'd already figured out most of it and just needed me to confirm. I made a split-second decision standing in that kitchen with Madeline waiting for my answer. I couldn't keep lying to her direct question, and honestly I was tired of carrying the secret alone. I asked if we could talk privately, and she led me to the back porch where no one else could hear. I pulled out my phone and showed her everything. The emails from Evan about Rachel's pattern 8 years ago. The messages from Virginia describing identical harassment. The documentation of Rachel's behavior over the past months. Then I explained the whole plan. How Tyler wasn't really a name rights lawyer because that wasn't a real thing. How we'd created fake documents and a fictional legal framework to stop Rachel's harassment. How Rachel had paid $8,000 for certificates that meant absolutely nothing. I told Madeline I'd felt backed into a corner with no other options. Rachel wouldn't stop. The family wasn't taking it seriously, and I needed to protect my daughter from the constant stress and drama. I admitted I knew it was deceptive and probably wrong, but I didn't know what else to do. Madeline stood completely still while I talked, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then she asked how much Rachel had paid total. When I said $8,000, she closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. She pressed her fingers against her temples like she had a headache coming on. She opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger exactly, but it wasn't understanding either. She asked if I'd thought about what would happen when Rachel eventually found out the truth. I admitted I hadn't planned that far ahead. I'd been so focused on making the harassment stop that I hadn't considered the aftermath. Madeline took a deep breath and said we had a serious problem now, because Rachel would find out eventually, and the fallout would be much worse than the original conflict. Madeline told me she got why I did it, but that I'd started something big. Rachel would find out eventually, and the family would blow up when she did. She asked if I'd thought about what comes next. I admitted I hadn't planned past stopping Rachel's constant harassment. I'd been so focused on protecting Lily and ending the stress that I didn't think about what happens after Rachel discovers the truth. Madeline said she needed time to figure out how to handle this, and she asked me not to tell anyone else yet. She was worried about Rachel's mental state when she finds out, and she wanted to have a plan ready before that happened. I agreed to keep quiet and went home feeling like the weight had shifted but not disappeared. 2 days later, Rachel's father, Aaron, called me. He said he was helping Rachel with some paperwork and noticed the law firm doesn't show up in any state bar association databases. My stomach dropped. I told Aaron I needed to talk to him in person, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop the next morning. I barely slept that night, going over what I'd say and how I'd explain it. When I walked into the coffee shop, Aaron was already there with a folder in front of him. He looked tired and confused, not angry yet. I sat down and pulled out my phone. I showed him everything. The emails from Evan about Rachel doing this exact same thing 8 years ago with his sister Virginia. The messages from Virginia describing identical harassment over the name Oliver. The documentation of Rachel calling Lily's daycare. The fake fundraising campaign where she raised $2,000 claiming she needed IVF. Then I explained the fake lawyer plan. I told him about Tyler agreeing to play along, about the made-up interstate family name registration system, about the $8,000 Rachel paid for certificates that mean nothing. I explained that I felt backed into a corner with no other options. Rachel wouldn't stop. The family wasn't taking it seriously, and I needed to protect my daughter from the constant drama. Aaron sat completely still while I talked. When I finished, he asked how much Rachel had paid total. I said $8,000. He closed his eyes and pressed his fingers against his temples. He opened them and looked at me with an expression that was part anger, part sadness. He said he knew Rachel had problems, but didn't realize how serious her patterns were. He was mad at me for the deception, but also mad at himself for letting Rachel's behavior go on so long without getting her real help. He admitted the family had been enabling her for years by treating her issues as quirks instead of problems. Aaron said he needed to tell Rachel the truth himself before she found out another way. He asked me to give him a few days to figure out how to approach it, and to prepare for her reaction. I agreed. 3 days later, Aaron called Rachel over to his house and told her everything. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Rachel was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called me a liar and a thief who stole her money on top of stealing her name. She said I'd ruined her life twice now and she'd never forgive me. She threatened to sue me for fraud. I stayed calm and told her she was welcome to try, but that would require explaining to a court why she thought she could legally own common names that millions of people already have. I also mentioned I had documentation of her harassment, including the fake fundraising campaign where she took money from relatives under false pretenses. Rachel went quiet for a second, then hung up on me. The family group chat exploded within an hour of Aaron telling Rachel the truth. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives taking sides. My uncle posted that I'd gone too far and hurt someone who clearly needed help instead of tricks. My younger cousin wrote that Rachel had this coming after years of making everyone walk on eggshells around her feelings. Madeline stayed quiet in the chat, but called me privately that evening. She asked how I was holding up and whether I'd thought about what happens at the next family gathering. I hadn't thought that far ahead because I was still processing Rachel's threats and the anger in her voice. The messages kept coming for 3 days straight. Some relatives defended me by pointing out Rachel's harassment and the fake fundraising scam. Others said I should have gone to the family for help instead of setting up an elaborate con. A few people tried to play peacemaker and suggested we all take a break from discussing it until emotions cooled down. Rachel posted on social media that night with a long explanation about being betrayed by family. She claimed I'd orchestrated everything because I was jealous of her close relationship with our grandmother. She said the fake lawyer proved I was willing to lie and manipulate to hurt her. The post got dozens of comments from her friends who didn't know the full story. They rallied around her and called me terrible names. Then she posted screenshots of the certificates Tyler had given her, pointing out details that should have tipped her off that they were fake. She was trying to show she wasn't stupid for falling for it while also painting herself as the victim. By the second day, people who'd donated to her IVF fundraiser started commenting on her posts asking for their money back. Someone found the original stock photos she'd used from the fertility clinic and posted comparison images. Rachel deleted those posts within an hour, but people had already taken screenshots. Her narrative was falling apart in real time as more people questioned her version of events. She made her accounts private, but the damage was done. Relatives who'd been sympathetic to her started asking questions about the fundraising money and whether she'd really planned to use it for IVF. Madeline called me on the fourth day and said she was organizing a family meeting to discuss everything. She specifically said Rachel wouldn't be invited because we needed to talk openly about the situation and figure out next steps. I asked if I had to come and she said yes, that avoiding it would make things worse. The meeting happened at Madeline's house on Sunday afternoon. 15 relatives showed up, which was more than I expected. Aaron was there looking exhausted. My uncle, who'd defended Rachel in the group chat, sat in the corner with his arms crossed. Madeline started by saying we needed to address two separate issues. First was Rachel's pattern of behavior and harassment. Second was my response and whether it crossed a line. The conversation got heated immediately. My aunt said Rachel obviously had mental health problems, and I'd taken advantage of that instead of helping her get treatment. I pointed out that I'd tried talking to Rachel multiple times, and the family had done nothing while she called my daughter's daycare and ran a fake fundraising scam. Aaron spoke up and admitted he'd enabled Rachel's behavior for years by making excuses and hoping she'd grow out of it. He said he felt guilty for not taking it seriously until it escalated this far. My uncle argued that didn't excuse what I did, that tricking someone into paying $8,000 for fake legal documents was fraud regardless of Rachel's behavior. Tyler's name came up and people asked if he could get in trouble legally. Someone pointed out that Rachel had committed fraud first with the IVF fundraising, and that she'd be opening herself up to serious consequences if she tried to sue anyone. The argument went in circles for over an hour. Some people thought I should return all of Rachel's money. Others thought she should face consequences for her actions, and that giving the money back would just enable her more. Madeline finally interrupted and asked what I wanted to do. I said I'd been thinking about it and I was willing to return half the money as a way to move forward. I didn't think I owed Rachel anything legally, but I wanted the family drama to end. I also said Tyler had agreed to return his half, which would total $4,000 going back to Rachel. My uncle shook his head and said that wasn't enough, that I needed to return all of it and apologize. But Madeline cut him off and said it was a fair compromise given everything Rachel had done. She asked if anyone else had thoughts, and most people stayed quiet. Aaron said he'd accept the money on Rachel's behalf. Then he told everyone that Rachel had started seeing a therapist 2 days ago to work through her patterns of obsessive behavior. He apologized for not taking her problems seriously sooner and for letting it get to this point. He looked directly at me when he said he understood why I felt backed into a corner with no other options. The meeting ended without any real resolution, but at least people had said what they needed to say. I wrote a check for $4,000 and gave it to Aaron before leaving. He folded it and put it in his wallet without looking at it. Over the next 2 months, Rachel didn't come to any family gatherings. I heard through various relatives that she was still in therapy and working on herself. My mom's cousin mentioned seeing Rachel at the grocery store and said she seemed calmer, less frantic than usual. Another relative said Rachel had acknowledged to her therapist that her behavior toward me had been wrong and harmful. I didn't know if that was true or just what people wanted to believe. The family dynamic shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Some relatives were warmer to me now, like they respected that I'd stood up for myself and my daughter. They'd stop me at gatherings to ask how Lily was doing and actually seemed interested in the answer. Other relatives became distant, uncomfortable with the whole situation even if they understood why I did what I did. They'd give me polite smiles but avoid real conversation. Holiday gatherings felt different, quieter somehow, like everyone was being careful not to bring up anything controversial. 6 weeks after the family meeting, Aaron stopped by my house with an envelope. He said it was from Rachel and that she'd asked him to deliver it. I opened it after he left and found a handwritten letter on plain notebook paper. Rachel didn't apologize exactly, but she wrote that she recognized she'd made my life difficult and that she understood why I felt I had to take extreme measures. She said her therapist was helping her see patterns in her behavior that she hadn't recognized before. The last paragraph asked that we stay away from each other at family events, that we both needed space to move forward. I texted Aaron that I agreed to the distance arrangement. For the next several months, we managed to avoid each other successfully. If we ended up at the same gathering, I'd stay in one room while she stayed in another. A few times we crossed paths in hallways or doorways, and we'd nod politely but say nothing. It was cold and awkward, but better than the alternative. My birthday came and went without any drama. Thanksgiving happened, and Rachel sat at the opposite end of the table. Christmas rolled around, and by then Lily was 10 months old, pulling herself up on furniture and babbling constantly. The family Christmas party was at Madeline's house again. I sat on the floor with Lily while she played with a set of stacking cups. She'd knock them over and laugh, then look at me to stack them again. My aunt came over and watched for a minute before saying Lily had grandmother's eyes and smile. Two other relatives commented on it throughout the evening, how much Lily resembled the grandmother we'd all loved. I watched my daughter play, completely unaware of the chaos her name had caused, and thought about how complicated families could be. I stayed on the opposite side of the room, organizing Lily's toys while relatives mingled around us. Rachel stood near the kitchen with my cousin Jennifer, their voices low but carrying across the space. I heard Rachel mention her therapist's name and something about weekly sessions. Jennifer asked how the therapy was going, and Rachel's response made me freeze mid-motion with a stuffed elephant in my hand. She said her therapist helped her understand that she'd been trying to control family legacy because she felt invisible in the family structure. She explained that watching me become a mother and honor grandmother's memory made her realize she had no clear role or identity within our family anymore. The words sounded rehearsed but genuine, like she'd practiced saying them out loud. Jennifer murmured something supportive, and Rachel continued talking about patterns of behavior and need for validation. I set the elephant down carefully and moved to a different area, not wanting to hear more. The self-awareness in her voice unsettled me more than her previous anger had. Madeline found me in the hallway near the bathroom 3 weeks later at another family gathering. She pulled me into an empty bedroom and closed the door behind us. She sat on the edge of the bed and gestured for me to sit beside her. She told me she'd been thinking about everything that happened, and she believed both Rachel and I needed to hit rock bottom before things could improve. Rachel needed to face real consequences for her behavior, instead of having family members excuse it away. I needed to confront my own capacity for manipulation when pushed too far. Madeline's words were direct but not unkind. She said watching the situation unfold showed her how easily good people could justify harmful actions when protecting their families. She squeezed my hand and stood up, saying she hoped we'd both learned something valuable from the mess we'd created together. The guilt crept in during quiet moments over the following months. I'd be feeding Lily or folding laundry and suddenly remember the look on Rachel's face when her father told her the truth. My husband found me crying in our bedroom one night, and I finally told him how much the deception bothered me. He listened without judgment and suggested I talk to someone professional about it. I started seeing a therapist in March, 8 months after the whole situation began. The therapist helped me work through the complicated feelings about protecting my family versus the methods I chose. She said my instinct to protect Lily was completely valid and natural. The fake lawyer plan crossed ethical lines but came from a place of desperation after exhausting other options. She asked me what I would do differently if faced with the same situation again. I said I'd probably do the same thing but feel guilty about it sooner. The sessions helped me understand that protecting my family was right, but the method I chose came with costs I was still processing. Some nights I still woke up thinking about the $8,000 and Rachel's triumphant social media posts before the truth came out. My cousin's wedding happened the following summer, 14 months after I'd first announced Lily's name to the family. The ceremony was outdoors at a vineyard, and the reception moved to a barn decorated with string lights and flowers. I wore a blue dress and carried Lily on my hip while she grabbed at my necklace. Rachel arrived alone and sat several rows behind us during the ceremony. At the reception, I was getting punch from the refreshment table when Rachel appeared beside me. She looked at Lily for a long moment before speaking. She said Lily was a beautiful name and that our grandmother would be proud. Her voice was quiet and steady, without the frantic edge it used to carry. I thanked her, and we stood there in awkward silence for a few seconds. She walked away without saying anything else, and I watched her join a group of cousins near the dance floor. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement that we'd both moved forward from the worst of it. Sometimes that's the best outcome possible when family hurts family, and sometimes moving forward separately is the only way to find any peace at all.